7. My men grow restive, and I can truly understand their positions. Galena, greatness beckons, and we have sat here on the edge of the desert. 'Twas by your command that we remained yet longer, my dear Augustus. He towered over her. Because you said that soon we would know better the location of Bartuk's armor. We would soon know where this fool brings it. Malevolence seized her hair, pulling her up until their faces nearly touched. Find him, my darling. Find him. Or I may have to find myself mourning your passing. She let him see no fear. Those who showed fear to the general became reduced in his eyes, never more respected, forever expendable. Glenn had worked hard and long to make certain that she remained invaluable, and she would not let that change now. I will see what I can do, but it must be accomplished without you this time. He frowned. You always required my presence in the past. Why the change now? Because what I must do will require me to delve deeper than I've ever before. And if for any reason I am disturbed at the wrong point, not only will it kill me, but it may also perhaps slay anyone nearby. This clearly impressed even the general. Brow raised, he nodded. Very well. Is there anything you require of it? A voice suddenly spoke in Galena's head. There must be some sacrifice. The sorceress smiled, wrapping one arm around Malevolent and putting her lips to his. As she pulled away from the kiss, she absently asked, Who's failed you most of late, my love? His mouth set into a straight edge, unyielding and unforgiving. Captain Talos has proven something of a disappointment of late. I think his dedication is slipping. Her hand stroked Malevolent's cheek. Then, perhaps I can make him more useful to you. I understand. I'll send him to you immediately. Just give me results. I think you will be pleased. We shall see. General Malevolent marched out of the tent. Galena immediately turned to the shadows. One in particular. You think it'll be enough? This one can only try, replied Zazax. The shadow separated from the others, moving nearer. Part of the shadow crossed over the sorcerer's foot, sending a sensation like approaching death through her. I must find him this time. You see how impatient the general gets? This one has waited much longer than the mortal, chittered the shade. This one desires the finding far more than even him. They both heard footsteps outside her tent. Zazek's silent silhouette immediately sank back into the rest of the shadows. Galena brushed back her hair, then adjusted her arresting garments for best viewing. You may enter, she cooed. A young officer, his helm in the nook of his arm, entered. Red-haired with a slight beard and eyes too innocent. He looked like a lamb coming to the slaughter. Galena remembered his face and the interesting notions that had crossed her mind more than once. Come closer, Captain Talos. The general sent me. The officer returned in a voice that held just a hint of uncertainty. No doubt he knew well of the sorceress's reputation, not to mention her appetites. He said you had a task for me? She went to the table where she kept wine for the general, pouring Tulos a cup of the finest. Galena held it up for him to see, beckoning the man to come to her. Like a fish to the lure, he did just that, his expression still confused. Pressing the cup in his hand, Galena led it to his mouth. At the same time, her other hand followed the course of his body, which further increased his anxiety. Lady Galena, Tallis stammered, the general sent me here for a purpose. It would not do for him to discover. Hush. She pushed the drink to his lips, making him sip. The fiery tressed soldier swallowed once, twice, before the enchantress lowered the cup again. With her free hand, she brought his lips to hers, keeping them there long. He hesitated for the first few seconds, then pressed hard, lost in her charms. Enough of the frail pleasures, came the demon's voice in her head. We have work to do. Behind the unarmored officer, the shadow grew, solidified. A sound akin to a dying swarm of flies arose, enough of a noise to finally snap Captain Tullos from the enchantment Galena had woven over him. The light of the oil lamp let part of a new shadow cross his field of vision, a shadow shaped like nothing human. Tullus pushed her away, then sought his sword as he turned to face his supposed assassin. You'll not take me so! Whatever words he planned failed him. Captain Tullus gaped, his skin turning completely white. His fingers still fumbled for the sword, but the overwhelming fear enveloped him, made his hands shake so much that he could not maintain any grip on the hilt. And looming before him, the demon Zazax surely represented a sight capable of instilling such horrific fear. More than 7 feet in height, Zazax resembled most a praying mantis, but a mantis as only hell could create. A mad mix of emerald and crimson colored, a body upon which pulsated green golden veins. The head of the demon looked as if someone had peeled off the outer shell of the insect, seeking the equivalent of a skull beneath. Oversized yellow pupils orbs stared at the puny mortal in mandibles wider than a soldier's head, with smaller yet equally savage ones near the actual mouth, open and closed with terrible eagerness. A stench like decaying vegetation pervaded the area surrounding the monstrous creature and even began permeating the tent. The middle appendages, skeletal arms with 3-fingered claws, reached out with lightning speed, dragging the petrified officer near. Tullus finally tried to scream, but the demon spat first, covering his victim's face with a soft, sticky substance. Zazek's main appendage rose high, 2 jagged scythes ending in nail-like points. He thrust both lances through the breastplate of the unfortunate officer, skewering Tullus like a fish. The body quivered violently, something that seemed to amuse Zazax greatly. Tullus' hands feebly clawed at both his chest and his face, succeeding in freeing neither. Galena frowned at the sight, trying to cover her own dread of the demon's physical presence with anger and sarcasm. If you're done playing, we have work to do. Zazax let the still quivering body slide free. Tullus dropped to the ground, his blood-soaked carcass splayed out like some stringless marionette. The hellish mantis prodded the officer's corpse toward her. Of course. I'll draw the patterns. You be ready to channel. This one will be prepared. Make no mistake about it, human Galena. Touching Tolo's chest, the witch began to shape the patterns needed. She drew first a series of concentric circles, afterwards placing a pentagram in the midst of the largest. Galena then traced in crimson both the marks of summoning and the wards that would protect her and even Zazax from being overwhelmed by the forces of the spell. After a few minutes' work, Galena had everything prepared. The sorceress glanced up at her demonic companion. This one is ready, as promised, came the raspy reply to her unspoken question. The mantis approached, his scythe-like arms reaching out to touch the center of Galena's main pattern. A sound that grated the sorcerer's ears erupted from Zazax, the demon speaking in a tongue with no earthly origins. She gave thanks that her protective spells kept anyone outside from hearing the creature's unholy voice. The tent began to shake. A wind arose inside, one that lifted Galena's hair and blew it back. The oil lamp flickered, at last dousing. But another light, a dank, poison green aura, emerged from the blood-soaked chest of the dead soldier. Zaza continued, muttering in his demonic tongue, at the same time the mantis drawing new variations in the crimson pattern. Galena felt forces both natural and hellish come forth, then mix in a combination otherwise impossible in the real world. She reached out, adding to the demon's variations on the patterns. Now the interior of the tent crackled with energies both in flux and in conflict. Speak the words, human, commanded Zazax. Speak before we are engulfed by our own creation. Galena did, the ancient syllables spilling from her lips. Each word made her own blood burn, made the horrific veins coursing over her partner flare over and over. The dark sorceress spoke more quickly, knowing that if she faltered, Zazek's fear might yet prove true. The thing, the color of mold and flesh, almost like a toad, formed above the body of Captain Tolos. It struggled, twisted, tried to cry out with a moan not completely formed. Let me rest, it demanded. Deformed beyond even the manner of demons, the grotesque creature sought to swipe first at Galena, then Zazax. However, the words that she had set into place caused a blue spark whenever the monstrosity reached out. A spark which cruelly hurt the thing much. In frustration, it finally pulled it within itself, wrapping spindly talon limbs around it as if trying to fold itself up enough to utterly disappear. You are ours to command, she told the imprisoned creature. I must rest. You cannot rest until you complete the task we've set for you. Nightmarish eyes that dangle loose, yet also seemed in some ways human, peered at her in open malevolence. Very well. For a time, anyway. What would you have of me. No magic blue binds your eyes. No blue barriers block your vision. See for us what we seek and tell us where it is. The horror above Tola's cooling body quivered, rumbled. Both Zazax and Galena bent back at first until both realized that the thing only laughed at their demand. That is all for this. I am tortured, forced awake, and even forced to remember. Recovering, the witch nodded. Do it, and we'll return you to your sleep. The eyes swung toward the demon. Show me what you seek. The mantis drew a circle, small in the midst of the main pattern. A haze of orange filled the area in which the trapped creature floated. The eyes stared into the haze, seeing what even Galena could not see. It becomes clearer. Clearer. What you seek. It will be requiring of a price. The payment, interjected Zazax. You already tasted a portion of it. Their prisoner gazed down at the body, accepted, and with that, a force struck Elena so hard within her mind that the sorceress fell back, collapsing onto her pillows. She sailed aboard a vessel of dubious means and reputation. A vessel fighting a storm she found not at all natural. The storm had already ripped apart some of the sails, yet still the ship pressed on. Curiously, Galena saw no crew aboard, almost as if only ghosts manned this vessel. However, something tugged at her, demanded she look beyond the deck. Without even moving her feet, the sorceress shifted position. The door of a cabin now before her. Galena raised one transparent hand, trying to push open that door. Instead, she drifted through it, entering the cabin like one of the specters she had imagined sailing the ship. Yet, the lone occupant of the sad excuse for a room in no manner resembled the dead. In fact, up close, he looked far more than Galena had first believed. Very much a soldier, very much a man. The witch tried to touch his face, but her hand went through his flesh. Nevertheless, he shifted slightly and almost smiled. Galena glanced down at the rest of his body, noting how Bartuk's armor fit him well. Then a shadow in the corner caught her attention. A shadow with a familiar feel to it. Zazax. Knowing that she had to tread carefully now, Galena focused on what she and the demon sought. Once more, acting as if she caressed the fighter's cheek, the witch murmured, "Who are you?" He turned slightly, as if unsettled. "Who are you?" she repeated. This time, his lips opened, and he mumbled, "Norik." She smiled at her success. On what ship do you sail? Oxfire. And what is its destination? Now he began to turn. A frown appeared on his slumbering visage, and he seemed unwilling to answer, even in his dreams. Determined not to fail in this, the most important of the questions, Galena repeated herself. Again it did not answer. The witch looked up, saw that Zazek's shadow grew stronger. She did not trust the demon to take care, though. In fact, his presence even threatened to jeopardize matters. The sorceress turned her attention back to Nork, leaning over him and speaking to him in a seductive tone she generally reserved most for Augustus. Tell me who you are, my brave, handsome warrior. Tell Galena, where do you sail? His mouth opened. Loot. At that moment, the demon's shadow crossed his face. Nork's eyes flew open. What in the name of... And Galena found herself back in the tent, her eyes staring toward the ceiling, her body covered in a chill sweat. You imbecile! She roared, picking herself up. What were you thinking? Zazek's mandible snapped open and closed. Thinking that this one could find answers much more quickly than a distracted female human. There are much better ways than fear for discovering secrets. I had him answering everything. A few moments more and we could have had all we needed to know. She thought quickly on the subject. Maybe it's not too late. If... She hesitated, staring down at where Tullus lay. Or rather, had lain. The body, even the blood that splattered the carpet, had vanished. The Dream One has taken his prize, Zazax remarked. This Captain Tullus will suffer a terrible death. Never mind him. We have to get the dreamer back. Here the mantis vehemently twisted his head back and forth, and closed. He came close to shaking it. This one will not defy a dreamer in his own domain. Their realm is beyond even that of hell or heaven. Here we may command them, but break the link, and they may take what is theirs. The demon leaned forward. Do you think your general might part with another soul? Galena ignored his suggestion, thinking what she could say to Malevolent. She had the names of both the man and the vessel, but what good would that do to her? The ship might be sailing anywhere. If only he had managed to blurt out his destination before the demon had fouled matters much. If only... He said loot, the witch gasped. It has to be. You have a thought? Loot Ghislaine, Zazax? Our fool journeys to Loot Ghislaine. Her eyes widened in satisfaction. He comes to us, just as I first said. The monstrous yellow eyes flashed once. You are certain of this? Very much. Galena let out a throaty chuckle. One that would have stirred many a man, but did nothing for the demon. I must go tell Augustus at once. This will keep him in line for the time being. She considered further. Perhaps I could finally convince him to dare the desert. He wants Luke Elaine. This gives him even more a reason to take it. Zazax gave her what the mantis appeared a puzzled look. But if the human malevolent throws his men at Lucoline, he will certainly fail. This one understands. How clever. I don't know what you mean, and I have no more time to argue with you. I must tell Augustus that the armor sails towards us as if the summoner by the very hand. She swept out of the tent, leaving the demon to his own devices. Sezek's glanced at the spot where the unfortunate officer's body had lain, but a short time before, then again at the tent flaps through which the dark-skinned sorcerers had passed. The armor sails toward us, yes, the mantis chittered, his form beginning to fade back into the shadows. Curious what your general would think of you, though, if it did not reach Lucolane. Norik's eyes flew open. What in the name of all... He paused, already half out his bunk. Even though the lamp had gone out, Norik could see well enough to know that he remained the only occupant of the cabin. The woman leaning over him, a sight he certainly would not soon forget, had evidently been a product of his dreams. What exactly she'd been doing, the veteran could not say. Only that she seemed interested in talking with him. A beautiful woman who only wanted to talk is certainly be after your purse. Faughton had once pointed out to Satan Triss after the latter had nearly lost his meager pay to a female thief. Yet, what harm could a woman in his dream do to Norik, especially considering his already dire situation? He wished that he had not awakened. Perhaps, if the dream had gone on longer, it would have proved more enticing. Certainly, it had been an improvement over his recent nightmares. Thinking of nightmares, Norik tried to remember what had actually made him call out. Not the woman. Some sense of foreboding. Not quite right either. More the feeling that something horrific had been encroaching upon him, even as the dark-skinned temptress had leaned nearer. A violent shift in the Hawksfire suddenly sent Norik tumbling. He fell against the cabin door, which swung open without warning. On his own, Norik would have not reacted swiftly enough, but one gauntleted hand shot out of its own accord, seizing hold of the doorframe and preventing the helpless soldier from crashing through the outside rail and plummeting into the stormy sea. Norik dragged himself to safety, then pulled himself to his feet. His hands, once more his own. Did Captain Costco no longer have any control over his crew? If they were not careful, they would end up letting the waves and the wind tear the Hawksfire apart. He seized a handhold and began fighting his way toward the bow. The roar of the waves and the constant rumble of thunder made it impossible to hear the mariners, but certainly Costco had to be berating them for their carelessness. Certainly, the captain would see to it his crew. Not a soul stood on the deck of the Hawksfire. Still unwilling to believe his eyes, Norik glanced up at the wheel. Using strong rope, someone had lashed it into one position, giving at least a semblance of control. However, there any concern for the ship ended. Already some of the lines for the sails fluttered loose, whipping about madly in the storm. One sail had tears in it that threatened to widen quicker unless someone did something. The crew had to be below. No one would be insane enough to abandon a serviceable ship, even the Hawksfire, in the midst of such a violent storm. Costco had likely summoned them in the mess in order to discuss some drastic measure. Surely, that had to be the lifeboat that should have been hanging, now vanished. Nora quickly peered over the rail, but saw only loose ropes battering the hull. No accident had occurred here. Someone had definitely lowered the boat into the water. He ran from rail to rail, confirming his greatest fear. The crew had abandoned the Hawksfire, leaving both it and Norik at the mercy of the storm. But why? It was a question to which he already knew the answer. He recalled the expressions of the crew after the suit had summoned the demons to repair the mast. Fear and horror, and both aimed not at the armor, but rather the man who wore it. The crew had to be afraid of the power they believed Nork wielded. Even from the start of the voyage, there had been a wariness wherever he had entered the mess. They had known, even then, that it would not be an ordinary passenger, and the incident involving the mast had more than proven them correct. Ignoring the rain and wind, he returned once more to the rail, trying to make out any sign of the crew. Unfortunately, they had likely left hours before, making good use of his exhaustion after the summoning. Never mind that they had probably condemned themselves to death on the sea. The mariners had feared more for their eternal souls than their mortal bodies. But where did that leave Norik? How could he hope to sail the Hawksfire to land by himself, much less even steer a course to Luke Lane? A creaking noise directly behind him made the desperate soldier quickly turn. Looking much bedraggled and not at all pleased to see Nork, Captain Costco emerged from below deck. He had appeared cadaverous before, but now he looked almost like a ghost. "You," he muttered. "Demon man." Nork closed in on him, seizing Costco by the shoulders. "What happened? Where's the crew?" "Left," the captain snapped, pulling free. "Drown on the sea rather than sail with Demon Master." He shoved past Nork. "Too much work to do. Away!" The dismayed soldier watched as Costco moved to tighten some lines. His entire crew had abandoned ship, but the captain insisted on not only trying to keep the Hawksfire seaworthy, but also en route. It seemed like a mad, pointless exercise, but Costco looked determined to try as best as he could. Following after, Nora called, "What can I do to help?" The soaked mariner gave him a contemptuous glance. "Jump over!" But Costco ignored him, moving on to the next ropes. Norik took one step, then realized how futile it would be to get the captain to listen. Costco had reason to both fear and hate him, and the veteran could not blame the man. Because of Norik, Costco would likely lose both his ship and his life. Lightning flashed, this time so near that Norik had to turn away in order to keep from being blinded. Frustrated by his inability to do anything, he headed to the doorway leading below deck. Perhaps out of the storm, he could better think. A few lanterns still provided light as he descended into the bowels of the Hawksfire, yet their illumination did not help Norik from being unsettled by the emptiness around him. Everyone but Costco had left the ship, daring certain death in order to be rid of the demon master in their midst. Likely, if they had thought they could have slain him, they would have tried that, but the display of power by the suit had clearly convinced them otherwise, which left Norik wondering how long the Hawksfire had before the waves and wind tore it apart. He glared at the gauntlets, the parts of the armor he most associated with his plight. If not for the suit, he would have never been in this predicament. Well, Norik nearly spat. What do you plan to do now? Are we to start swimming if the ship sinks? At first he regretted even making the suggestion, fearful that the armor would choose to attempt to do just that. Norik tried not to picture the heavy armor trying to stay afloat. To him, who had rarely taken the sea save for short voyages, drowning seemed the most horrible of fates. To suffocate, to have his lungs fill with water as the dark sea engulfed him. Better to run a blade through his gut instead. The hawk's fire shook, this time in so violent a manner that the hull moaned ominously. Nor gazed toward the ceiling, wondering if Captain Costco had finally lost what little control of the ship he had briefly had. Again the vessel shook, the planks literally bending. A few more moments of this and the soldier felt certain that all his darkest fears would come true. Already he could feel the waters closing in. Determined not to fall victim to panic, Norik raced the stairway, fighting to keep his footing as he rushed back up the deck. Whatever the mariner might think of him, Norik had to try to somehow help Costco regain mastery of the Hawksfire. He heard Costco shouting something in his native tongue, an unending litany of curses from the sound of it. Norik looked around, trying to find the captain in the storm. He found Costco, along with a gigantic nightmare rising from the sea. A gargantuan horror with what seemed 100 tentacles, and one vast red orb had a bow and the Voxfire in the clutches. The aquatic behemoth resembled a giant squid, but only if some great force had ripped away its skin and put in place wicked barbs everywhere. Worse, many of the smaller tentacles had, not suction cups, but rather tiny, claw-like hands that grasped and pulled whatever part of the ship they could reach. Sections of the rail came away readily, as did some of the deck itself. Several hands and tentacles sought for the sails. Captain Costco ran about the deck, ducking one, attacking appendage, and swatting at others with a long hooked pole. On the deck near him, one ripped end of a tentacle flopped around, dark ichor pouring from that torn section. Defying the danger all about him, the mariner continued to fend off the monstrous sea creature. The sight looked as absurd as it did terrifying. One lone man trying to stop the inevitable. Once more, Norik looked down at the gloves, shouting, "Do something!" The suit did not react. With nothing else left for him, Norik looked around, seeking a weapon. Seeing another of the hooked poles, he immediately seized it and ran it to Costco's side. His actions proved most timely, for at that moment, a pair of clawed hands rose behind the battling captain, reaching for his back. One hand managed to dig into Costco's bony shoulder, causing the captain to cry out. Norik brought the hooked pole into play, burying the point in the monster's hand and pulling with all his might. To his amazement, the hand tore off, dropping to the deck. At the same time, though, the second appendage, inhuman claws outstretched, turned toward Norik. In addition, two tentacles with suction cups darted in from the veteran fighter's right. Bringing the pole around him, Norik tore into one of the tentacles, sending it retreating. The hand snapped at him, talons as long as the fingers trying to rip into Norik's face. He swatted at it with the side of the pole, but missed. What sort of monster had risen up from the depths? Although he would have willingly admitted that he knew little about the life in the Twin Seas, Norik Vizerin had heard no tales of any creature akin to this ungodly abomination. It looked more like a thing out of a tale of horror, a beast more at home with the demonic imps the suit had earlier summoned. Demons? Could this creature be some sort of demonic force? Could that explain why the armor had not reacted? It still left so much unexplained. Yet, more than a dozen new tentacles, some with the bizarre clawed hands and some not, erupted from the sea, assaulting anew both Costco and Nork from various directions. More adept at using the hook pull, the lanky captain disproved his slicky appearance by swiftly tearing out into two of the tentacles. Nork proved not so fortunate, managed to push back a few of the horrors, but doing damage to none. More and more tentacles turned from the task of ripping the ship to pieces to now dealing with the only resistance. One managed to seize Costco's pole, pulling it free with such force that the captain fell to the deck, his bad leg giving out on him at last. Several clawed tentacles encircled him, dragging Costco toward the great behemoth. Nork would have helped, but his own troubles grew worse than those of the mariner. Tentacles wound around both legs and his waist. Two more tore the pull from his hands. The soldier found himself hoisted up into the air, his breath slowly being squeezed out of him despite the enchanted armor. He screamed as a set of claws raked his left cheek. Somewhere beyond his limited field of vision, Nork heard Costco uttering oaths, even as death prepared to welcome both men. A serpentine shape curled around Nork's throat. In desperation, he tugged at it, already aware that his strength would not prove sufficient to save him. The gauntlet flared a fiery red. The tentacle instantly recoiled from his throat, but the glove would not release it. Nork's other hand, also glowing furiously, came up, seizing the tentacle, holding him by the upper part of his waist. The rest of the behemoth's limb pulled away, leaving the startled veteran dangling by his hands high above the hawksfire. The storm whipped him about, but Bardock's armor refused to give up on his hold of the gargantuan monster. Even when the beast sought to separate the captured tentacles, Nork screamed, his arms feeling as if they would soon be torn from their sockets. Kazanium! His mouth shouted, Lazar! Lazar! A bolt of lightning struck the Leviathan. The creature shuddered, nearly succeeding in freeing itself of Nork simply due to its throes of pain. Yet even then, the gauntlets fought to retain hold. Clearly the warlord's suit was not finished yet. Kazar! Niam! The soldier's mouth replied, Lazara Decadas! A second bolt caught the sea monster directly in its terrifying eye. The bolt burned away the ore with little trouble, sending a shower of hot fluids over Nork and the ship. Decadas! The area of the tentacles around Nork's fingers turned to pasty gray. Serpentine flesh grew stony, petrified with startling swiftness. The Leviathan stiffed, its many appendages remaining in whatever position they had been just after the last of the magical words had been spoken. The pasty gray coloring spread rapidly down the two tentacles of the hapless soldier held, then coursed along in every direction, covering the giant's body and other limbs in mere sections. Nork shouted a third, and so he suspected, final time. A flash of lightning more intense than either of the others struck the graying sea demon directly in the ruined eye. The horrific behemoth shattered. The gauntlets released their grip on the crumbling tentacles, at the same time returning control of the hands to Nork. Suddenly bereft of any hold, the startled fighter frantically grabbed at one of the massive limbs, only to have the piece he seized break off. He plummeted toward the ship, his only hope that he would die crashing into the hard deck rather than sinking beneath the violent waters.